The lone silhouette of Beatrice Taylor stood on the dusty platform of Ely, Nevada, as the train that had delivered her to what should have been her new life chugged away in a cloud of black smoke and bitter disappointment. It was 1877, and at 35 years old, Beatrice had just experienced the humiliation of being rejected by her would-be husband before she'd even had the chance to unpack her modest trunk. The autumn wind whipped at her skirts as she watched the train disappear over the horizon. Her fingers clutched the telegram that had sealed her fate, the paper now crumpled from her tight grip. 3 months of correspondence with Franklin Wilcox had culminated in this moment, standing alone in a frontier town with nowhere to go, deemed too old by a man who had lied about his own preferences. "I specifically requested a bride no older than 25, Franklin had sneered when he saw the fine lines at the corners of her eyes. "What am I supposed to do with a woman halfway to the grave? The advertisement agency will hear about this deception." No amount of explanation that the agency had been fully informed of her age would persuade him. He'd put her right back on the train, but not before making sure everyone at the station heard his complaints. "Send her back. I won't be saddled with someone's discarded spinster." Now, as the station emptied and the sun dipped lower in the Nevada sky, Beatrice allowed herself a moment of despair. Her savings were meager, barely enough for a room for a few nights before she would have to find work if anyone would hire her. Back east, opportunities for a woman of her age were already limited. In this rough mining town, they would be even scarcer. "Madam, you look like you could use a place to sit down." The voice came from behind her, deep and measured with a slight drawl. Beatrice turned to find a tall man regarding her with curious eyes. His face was tanned and weathered from the sun, framed by dark hair that curled at the collar of his worn leather vest. A cowboy, by the look of him, though his manner was gentler than his rugged appearance suggested. "I'm fine, thank you," she replied automatically, straightening her back despite the weariness that threatened to bend it. He nodded, respectful of her pride. "Name's Xavier Young. I run the Y-Cross Ranch about 5 miles north of town. I couldn't help overhearing what happened earlier." Beatrice felt heat rise to her cheeks. Of course he had heard, everyone had heard. "I'm sure the entire territory is aware by now," she said stiffly. Xavier's mouth quirked up at one corner, not quite a smile. "This town's got a short memory for most things. By tomorrow, they'll be onto something new." He gestured to her trunk. "You got plans for where to stay? I'll find accommodations at the hotel, I'm sure." The Ely house is full up with miners from the new silver strike, and Mrs. Peterson's boarding house doesn't take single ladies, thinks it's improper. He said this without judgment, simply stating facts. "But I know the widow Jenkins takes in boarders occasionally. She's a good woman, fair-minded." Beatrice studied him, trying to determine his intentions. In her experience, men didn't offer assistance without expecting something in return. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Young?" He shrugged broad shoulders. "Seems the decent thing to do, and if you don't mind my saying so, Franklin Wilcox is a fool. Age means wisdom to me, madam. Something in short supply out here." His candor caught her off guard. In the letters from Franklin, there had been flattery and promises, but nothing that felt as genuine as this stranger's simple statement. "Beatrice Taylor," she offered, extending her hand. "And I would be grateful for an introduction to this Mrs. Jenkins." Xavier took her hand, his grip firm but careful. "Miss Taylor, let me help with your trunk." As he lifted her belongings with ease, Beatrice found herself following this unexpected ally into the dusty streets of Ely. She had come west seeking a new beginning, a husband, a home. All of that had been snatched away in an instant by Franklin's cruelty. Yet as she walked beside Xavier Young through the lengthening shadows, She couldn't help but wonder if perhaps fate had other plans for her in this wild land. Mrs. Jenkins was indeed fair-minded, and, as it turned out, in need of help with her small laundry business. By the end of that first evening, Beatrice had secured not only a place to stay but also employment that would sustain her while she figured out her next steps. "You're a godsend, Miss Taylor," the older woman said as she showed Beatrice to a small but clean room at the back of the house. "These hands of mine aren't what they used to be, and the miners don't care if their shirts are washed by a woman of 20 or 50, so long as they come back clean." Beatrice set her small bag of personal items on the narrow bed. "I'm happy to help, Mrs. Jenkins, and I'm grateful for the room." The widow waved away her thanks. "That Xavier has good sense. Most men around here wouldn't see past your pretty face to notice you've got a good head on your shoulders, too." She gave Beatrice a knowing look. "He's a good man, that one. Never understood why he keeps to himself so much." "He was very kind to help me," Beatrice agreed, carefully neutral. She wasn't in Ely to find another potential husband, especially not after today's humiliation. She was here now simply to survive. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of crystalline light that Beatrice had never seen back east. She rose early, determined to earn her keep and prove her worth to Mrs. Jenkins. By midday, her arms ached from scrubbing and wringing, but she felt a sense of accomplishment as she hung the last of the miners' shirts on the line to dry in the Nevada sun. "You're a hard worker." She turned to find Xavier Young leaning against the fence that enclosed Mrs. Jenkins's small yard, his hat tipped back on his head. "Mr. Young," she acknowledged with a nod. "Mrs. Jenkins was kind enough to give me employment as well as lodging." "Good woman, Mrs. Jenkins." "How are you settling in?" Beatrice wiped her damp hands on her apron. "Well enough, thank you. Was there something you needed?" He seemed to hesitate, then straightened up from the fence. "I wanted to make sure you were all right after yesterday. And to ask if you'd like to join me for supper at the cafe. They make a decent stew on Tuesdays." She regarded him warily. "Mr. Young, if this is some kind of charity—" "It's not charity, Miss Taylor," he interrupted. "It's a meal between two people who are new to knowing each other. Nothing more." Beatrice considered his offer. There was something straightforward about Xavier Young that she found refreshing after Franklin's deception. And despite her determination to focus solely on her independence, she had to admit that the prospect of a meal not eaten alone was appealing. "Very well, Mr. Young. What time shall we meet? I'll come by at 6 if that suits you." "It does, thank you." He tipped his hat to her and turned to leave, then paused. "Miss Taylor." "Yes. That fool Wilcox, he didn't deserve to have you step off that train for him." Before she could respond, he was walking away, his long strides carrying him quickly down the street. Beatrice returned to her laundry, aware of an unexpected warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the Nevada sun. At 6 o'clock precisely, Xavier arrived at Mrs. Jenkins's door, dressed in a clean shirt and his least worn pair of trousers. Mrs. Jenkins gave Beatrice a sly wink as she ushered them both out the door with unnecessary enthusiasm. The cafe was small but busy, filled with miners and townspeople enjoying their evening meal. Heads turned as they entered, and Beatrice could feel the curious stares. No doubt the story of her rejection had indeed made the rounds. Xavier led her to a small table near the back, away from the most prying eyes. "Don't mind them," he said quietly as he held her chair. "Like I said, short memories." "I hope you're right about that," Beatrice replied, arranging her skirts as she sat. "I would rather not be known as that mail-order bride who got sent back for the duration of my stay in Ely." "And how long might that be?" Xavier asked as he took his own seat. Beatrice considered the question. "I haven't decided. I have enough saved to return east if necessary, but—" She trailed off, unsure how to express the mixture of determination and uncertainty she felt. "But you're not one to run back with your tail between your legs," Xavier finished for her. She smiled despite herself. "Something like that, yes." The waitress arrived with bowls of steaming stew and fresh bread. As they ate, Xavier told her about his ranch, the challenges of raising cattle in the high desert, and his plans to expand his operation. Beatrice found herself responding with stories of her work as a schoolteacher back in Pennsylvania, her care for her ailing parents until their deaths 2 years prior, her decision to answer Franklin's advertisement. "Why did you?" Xavier asked suddenly. "Answer his ad, I mean." Beatrice set down her spoon, considering her answer carefully. "I suppose I wanted something different. After my parents passed, there was nothing holding me in Harrisburg. The school had younger teachers coming in and I—" She hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I was lonely. And perhaps a bit afraid of growing old alone." Xavier nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's not something to be ashamed of. We all want companionship." "And you, Mr. Young, have you never sought a wife?" he chuckled, a low sound that Beatrice found surprisingly pleasant. "Call me Xavier, please. And yes, I had a wife once, about 10 years ago. Sarah was her name. She died in childbirth, along with our son." "I'm sorry," Beatrice said softly, understanding now the shadow she sometimes glimpsed behind his eyes. "It was a long time ago," he replied, though his voice suggested the wound was not entirely healed. "I've had offers to introduce me to eligible young ladies over the years, but I never saw the point. Most girls around here are looking for excitement or a way out of their parents' homes. They don't understand what it means to build something lasting." "And what about older women?" Beatrice asked before she could stop herself. "Do they understand?" His eyes met hers across the table. "I think they might, yes. Age means wisdom, like I said, experience. Knowing what matters and what doesn't." For the first time since stepping off that train, Beatrice felt a flutter of something that might have been hope. Not for romance, she was too practical to indulge in such fancies, but for the possibility that her age might not be the impediment she had been led to believe. As they walked back to Mrs. Jenkins's house in the deepening twilight, Xavier offered her his arm. Beatrice hesitated only briefly before placing her hand on his sleeve. "Thank you for supper," she said. "It was kind of you." "My pleasure," he replied. "Perhaps you might like to see the ranch sometime. It's not much to look at yet, but I've got plans." Beatrice considered the invitation. "I would like that, yes." They stopped at Mrs. Jenkins's gate and Xavier released her arm. "Sunday, then. I could bring the wagon around mid-morning if you're not otherwise engaged." "Sunday would be fine," she agreed. He tipped his hat to her. "Good night, Beatrice." "Good night, Xavier." As she watched him walk away, Beatrice felt a curious lightness in her step as she entered the house. Mrs. Jenkins was waiting in the sitting room, pretending to mend but clearly eager for details. "Had a nice evening, did you?" the older woman asked, trying and failing to sound casual. "Very pleasant, thank you," Beatrice replied, unwilling to feed the woman's obvious curiosity. "Xavier Young is quite a catch, you know," Mrs. Jenkins continued undeterred. "Owns that ranch free and clear. No debts. And he's kind to boot, helped me fix my roof last winter without being asked." Beatrice smiled. "He seems a good man, but I'm not looking for a husband, Mrs. Jenkins. I've had quite enough of that particular aspiration for now." The widow snorted. "So you say. But mark my words, a woman with sense and a man with land, there's a natural matching there." "Perhaps for someone else," Beatrice said firmly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm rather tired." In her small room, as she prepared for bed, Beatrice found herself thinking of Xavier's steady gaze and his words about wisdom. It was refreshing to be valued for something other than youth or beauty. But she reminded herself not to read too much into a simple kindness. Xavier Young might appreciate maturity, but that didn't mean he was looking for a wife, especially one who had already been deemed undesirable by another man. The remainder of the week passed in a blur of work. Beatrice's capable hands and organizational skills soon had Mrs. Jenkins's laundry business running more efficiently than ever. By Friday, the widow was singing her praises to anyone who would listen. "Best decision I ever made taking you in," she told Beatrice as they folded sheets together. "My arthritis hasn't flared up once since you started doing the heavy wringing." Beatrice smiled. "I'm glad to be useful and grateful for the opportunity." "Speaking of opportunities," Mrs. Jenkins said with a sly glance, "I hear Xavier Young's been making improvements to his house lately." "Adding a proper parlor, so I'm told." "Is that so?" Beatrice replied noncommittally. A man doesn't add a parlor unless he's thinking about entertaining or bringing home a wife." Beatrice shook out another sheet with perhaps more force than necessary. "Mrs. Jenkins, I do wish you wouldn't speculate. Mr. Young and I are barely acquaintances." "Acquaintances who are spending Sunday together," the widow countered with a knowing smile. "He's simply being neighborly." "If you say so, dear." Sunday morning arrived clear and cool. Beatrice dressed with care in her best day dress, a deep blue wool that complemented her auburn hair. She pinned that hair up neatly, studying her reflection in the small mirror above her washstand. The fine lines at the corners of her eyes were indeed visible, as were the few strands of silver beginning to thread through her hair. But she was still a handsome woman with clear skin and bright eyes. "Not that it matters," she told her reflection firmly. This was not a courtship outing, merely a friendly excursion. Xavier arrived promptly at 10, driving a wagon that had been swept clean of dust. He helped Beatrice up to the seat with a strong, steady hand. "You look very nice," he said as he took his place beside her and picked up the reins. "Thank you," she replied, smoothing her skirts. "It's kind of you to show me your ranch." "I'm not sure kind is the word," he said with a slight smile. "I'm rather proud of it, to be honest, any excuse to show it off." The drive took them north out of Ely, the road winding through sagebrush and juniper. Xavier pointed out landmarks along the way, a distinctive rock formation, the turn to the nearest neighbor's property, a creek that ran strong in the spring. "It's beautiful country," Beatrice observed, taking in the vast expanse of high desert and the distant mountains. "Different from what I'm used to, but beautiful in its own way." "That's what I thought when I first came here," Xavier agreed. "It grows on you, this land. Gets under your skin until you can't imagine being anywhere else." "How long have you been here?" 15 years now. Came out from Missouri after the war. Worked as a hand on a few different spreads before I saved enough to buy my own place." "The war was difficult for you?" Beatrice asked, noting the shadow that crossed his face at the mention of it. Xavier was silent for a moment. "It was difficult for everyone who lived through it. I was young, too young, really, but I believed in the Union cause. Still do. But I saw things no boy should see. Did things I'm not proud of." "I'm sorry," Beatrice said softly. "I didn't mean to bring up painful memories." He shook his head. "It's all right. It shaped me for better or worse, made me value peace, made me want to build something instead of destroy." The road curved around a hill, and suddenly the Y-Cross Ranch came into view, a modest but well-maintained house, a large barn, several outbuildings and corrals with horses and cattle. A creek ran along one side of the property, lined with cottonwoods whose leaves shimmered gold in the autumn light. "It's lovely," Beatrice said sincerely. "You've built something wonderful here." Xavier's expression softened with pride. "It's getting there. Still plenty to do, but it's home." He helped her down from the wagon and showed her around the property. The barn was clean and orderly, the livestock healthy and well cared for. The vegetable garden behind the house was neatly tended, with late-season squash and root vegetables still growing. "You do all this yourself?" Beatrice asked, impressed by the scale of the operation. "I have 2 hands who help with the cattle and horses, Manuel and his son Diego. They live in the small cabin by the creek, and I hire extra help during calving and branding season. But the garden's mine." He looked almost bashful. "I like growing things." Inside the house, Beatrice could see the signs of the renovations Mrs. Jenkins had mentioned. The main room was large and airy, with new wallpaper and a polished wooden floor. A doorway at one side led to what was clearly intended to be a parlor, though it contained only a few pieces of furniture so far. "It's coming along," Xavier said, following her gaze. "I thought it was time this place looked more like a proper home and less like a bachelor's cabin." "It's very nice," Beatrice assured him. "You have good taste." They ate a simple but delicious lunch that Xavier had prepared: cold chicken, fresh bread, and apple pie that he admitted sheepishly had been purchased from the cafe in town. "I can cook well enough to keep from starving," he said with a chuckle, "but baking is beyond my skills." "I could teach you if you like," Beatrice offered, then felt her cheeks warm at the presumption. "That is, if you're interested in learning." His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "I'd like that very much." After lunch, they walked down to the creek, where Xavier showed her a spot where beaver had built a dam. "They're ingenious creatures," he said as they watched the rippling water. "Know exactly how to work with what they have." "A valuable skill," Beatrice agreed. "One I've been trying to develop myself." Xavier glanced at her. "You're doing well at that from what I can see. You've made yourself indispensable to Mrs. Jenkins in less than a week." "It's not quite the life I imagined when I came west," she admitted, "but it's honest work." "What did you imagine?" he asked, genuinely curious. Beatrice sighed, watching the play of light on the water. "A home of my own, I suppose. Children, perhaps, though at my age that might be unlikely. Mostly just belonging somewhere with someone." Xavier was quiet for a long moment. "I think that's what most of us want when it comes down to it." They stood in companionable silence, the only sounds the gurgle of the creek and the rustle of leaves overhead. It was peaceful in a way Beatrice hadn't experienced in a long time. All too soon, it was time to return to town. As they drove back in the late afternoon light, Beatrice found herself wishing the day could last longer. "Thank you for showing me your home," she said as they neared Ely. "It's a special place." "You're welcome anytime," Xavier replied, his voice warm. "Perhaps next Sunday if you're free." "I could use some advice on curtains for that parlor," Beatrice laughed. "Are you sure you want advice from a spinster school teacher?" "I'm sure I want advice from a woman with good sense and taste," he corrected gently. "Besides, spinster is just a word folks use when they can't think of anything better to say about a woman who knows her own mind." His defense of her warmed Beatrice more than she cared to admit. "Then yes, I'd be happy to help with your curtains." When they reached Mrs. Jenkins's house, Xavier helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering slightly longer than necessary at her waist. "Until next Sunday, then," he said, his eyes holding hers. "Yes," Beatrice replied, suddenly aware of her heartbeat. "Until then." Mrs. Jenkins, naturally, was full of questions when Beatrice entered the house. Beatrice answered them as briefly as possible before escaping to her room, where she sat on the edge of her bed and tried to make sense of the emotions swirling within her. It was foolish, she told herself sternly, to feel this way about a man she barely knew. She had come to Ely with romantic notions once before, and look how that had ended. Yet Xavier Young was nothing like Franklin Wilcox. There was a substance to him, a quiet integrity that spoke louder than any flowery declarations. But even if Xavier did find her company pleasant, that didn't mean he was looking for a wife. And Beatrice wasn't sure she was ready to risk her heart again so soon after having it bruised. Monday morning brought an unexpected development. As Beatrice was hanging laundry in the yard, a woman approached the fence, elegant, well-dressed, and imperious in bearing. "You must be Miss Taylor," the woman said without preamble. "I am Mrs. Eleanor Wilcox." Beatrice stiffened. "Franklin's mother, indeed. May I come in? I wish to speak with you privately." Curiosity overcoming caution, Beatrice nodded and led the way into the house, grateful that Mrs. Jenkins had gone to deliver clean laundry to several households. In the small sitting room, Mrs. Wilcox perched on the edge of a chair as if afraid it might soil her expensive dress. "I'll be direct, Miss Taylor," she said once they were seated. "My son behaved abominably toward you. I've come to apologize on his behalf and to make amends." Beatrice was too stunned to reply immediately. Of all the scenarios she had imagined for this Monday morning, this had not been among them. Mrs. Wilcox continued, her gloved hands folded primly in her lap. "Franklin has always been impetuous and vain. He wanted a young, pretty ornament, not a wife of substance. I tried to counsel him otherwise, but he wouldn't listen." "I see," Beatrice said carefully. "While I appreciate the apology, Mrs. Wilcox, I'm not sure what amends you could possibly make." The older woman reached into her reticule and withdrew an envelope. $500. "It should compensate you for your trouble and help you establish yourself here or return east if you prefer." Beatrice stared at the envelope, then back at Mrs. Wilcox. "You want to pay me off, as if I were some kind of merchandise that was damaged in transit, Mrs." Wilcox had the grace to look uncomfortable. "That's not how I intended it. I simply want to right a wrong." "The wrong can't be righted with money, Mrs. Wilcox. Your son humiliated me publicly. He treated me as if my worth as a human being diminished with each year past 25. That's not something you can simply buy your way out of." "Nevertheless," Mrs. Wilcox insisted, placing the envelope on the small table between them, "I hope you'll accept it. Use it however you see fit. Perhaps to start a business of your own, since I understand you're currently working as a laundress." The condescension in her tone made Beatrice's spine stiffen. "There is nothing shameful about honest work, Mrs. Wilcox, and I don't need your charity." The older woman rose, her expression cooling. "It's not charity, Miss Taylor. It's compensation. But if your pride won't allow you to accept it, I can't force you." She moved toward the door, then paused. "I should warn you, however, that Franklin is not pleased about your continued presence in Ely. He feels it reflects poorly on him." "Does it?" Beatrice asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "I would think his own behavior reflects far more on his character than my mere existence." "Perhaps, but my son has influence in this town. It might be easier for you elsewhere." With that parting shot, Mrs. Wilcox swept out, leaving Beatrice staring at the envelope on the table. After a moment of internal debate, she snatched it up and hurried after the woman. "Mrs. Wilcox," she called, catching up to her at the gate. "You forgot something." She held out the envelope, and Mrs. Wilcox regarded her with something like respect. "You're either very foolish or very principled, Miss Taylor." "I prefer to think it's the latter," Beatrice replied. "Please tell your son that I wish him well with his next mail-order bride. Perhaps he should specify young and compliant in his next advertisement." Mrs. Wilcox's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. "I shall convey your good wishes." She hesitated, then added more quietly, "For what it's worth, Miss Taylor, I think my son made a grave error in judgment. You would have made him a far better wife than he deserved." Before Beatrice could respond, The woman was walking briskly away down the street, her back straight and her head high. Mrs. Jenkins was full of questions when she returned and learned of Mrs. Wilcox's visit. The nerve of that woman! Trying to pay you to leave town, as if you'd done anything wrong. She was trying to protect her son's reputation, Beatrice said, more calmly than she felt, and perhaps trying to salve her own conscience. Well, I think it's shameful. And for her to imply that Franklin has any real influence in Ely Ha. Everyone knows the Wilcox money is running out. That's why he wanted a mail-order bride instead of courting one of the local girls. None of them would have him once they learned the estate is mortgaged to the hilt. This was news to Beatrice. Is that true? As true as I'm standing here, Mrs. Jenkins confirmed with a nod. They put on a good show, the Wilcoxes, but they've been selling off parcels of land for years. That big house of theirs is practically empty of furniture now, I hear. Beatrice absorbed this information with a strange sense of relief. Franklin's rejection had stung her pride deeply. Learning that it might have been motivated by financial desperation rather than her personal shortcomings was oddly comforting. I wonder if Xavier knows, she mused aloud. Mrs. Jenkins gave her a knowing look. Oh, I'm sure he does. That man keeps his ear to the ground, probably why he never had any time for Franklin Wilcox, despite them being the same age and from similar backgrounds. What do you mean, similar backgrounds? Xavier's people were plantation owners in Missouri before the war, lost everything when they freed their slaves early before the emancipation. Mind you, they believed it was wrong to own people. Xavier's father fought for the Union, got himself killed at Shiloh. The mother died not long after. Xavier was just a boy, but he enlisted anyway, lied about his age. Came west after the war with nothing but the clothes on his back and built himself up from nothing. Beatrice hadn't known any of this. It explained the shadows she sometimes saw in Xavier's eyes, the old pain that seemed to surface occasionally in his expression. How do you know all this? She asked. Mrs. Jenkins shrugged. People talk, and I listen. It's one of the advantages of being old folks, don't mind saying things in front of you, as if you're just part of the furniture. The following day, as Beatrice was delivering clean laundry to the mercantile, she encountered Franklin Wilcox on the boardwalk. He was dressed in an expensive suit that looked slightly too large for him, as if he had lost weight recently. Miss Taylor, he said stiffly, blocking her path. I understand my mother visited you yesterday. She did, Beatrice confirmed, keeping her voice neutral. And I understand you refused her assistance. I did. Franklin's face flushed with anger. You're being deliberately difficult. If you had any decency, you'd leave Ely and save us all the embarrassment of your presence. Beatrice regarded him calmly, aware that several passers-by had slowed to listen. Mr. Wilcox, I have done nothing to embarrass anyone but mind my own business and work honestly for my keep. If my mere existence causes you discomfort, perhaps you should examine why that is. You misrepresented yourself, he hissed. I specifically requested a young bride. And I specifically informed the agency of my age, Beatrice replied. If there was misrepresentation, it was not on my part. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have deliveries to complete. She moved to step around him, but Franklin grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. You listen to me. Take your hand off the lady. Xavier's voice, cold and hard, cut through the tension. He stood a few feet away, his stance relaxed but his eyes dangerous. Franklin released Beatrice immediately. This is none of your concern, Young. You're manhandling a lady on a public street. I'm making it my concern. Xavier moved to stand beside Beatrice. Are you all right? He asked her quietly. I'm fine, she assured him, rubbing her arm where Franklin's fingers had left marks. Xavier's jaw tightened as he noticed the gesture. Wilcox, I suggest you go home and reconsider your approach to dealing with your personal problems. Bullying women isn't going to solve whatever troubles you're facing. Franklin's face mottled with rage. You self-righteous bastard. You think you're better than everyone else because you work with your hands and live like a peasant. At least I come from clean money, not slave profits. Xavier didn't flinch. My family freed their slaves before the war because they recognized a moral wrong. Can you say the same about how your father made his fortune in mining? How many men died in his unsafe shafts while he counted his silver dollars? The gathered crowd murmured. Clearly this was a sore point in Ely's history. Franklin sputtered, unable to form a coherent retort. Finally, he spat on the ground near Xavier's boots. This isn't over, Young. Yes, it is, Xavier replied evenly. Go home, Franklin. After a moment of tense silence, Franklin turned and stalked away, shouldering roughly past several onlookers. Xavier turned to Beatrice. I'm sorry about that. Are you sure you're all right? Yes, thank you. She glanced at the dispersing crowd, embarrassed by the public scene. Though I seem to be developing a habit of creating spectacles in Ely. None of that was your doing, Xavier assured her, taking the heavy basket of laundry from her arms. Let me help you with your deliveries. As they walked together down the street, Beatrice asked, Is it true what he said? About your family owning slaves? Xavier's expression tightened. Yes. My grandfather was a plantation owner in Missouri, but my father couldn't reconcile his Christian beliefs with owning other human beings. He freed all the family's slaves in 1858, 3 years before the war started. Paid for passage north for those who wanted to go, offered wages to those who chose to stay and work the land. Most of the neighbors thought he was crazy. That was a brave stance to take, Beatrice said softly. It was the right thing to do, Xavier replied simply. Though it cost the family everything in the end, the neighbors boycotted our crops, the bank called in loans. By the time the war started, we were nearly ruined anyway. And your father fought for the Union, died at Shiloh in '62. I was 15, lied about my age and enlisted 6 months later. My mother, he paused, his voice roughening. She died before I got home, influenza. Beatrice touched his arm gently. I'm so sorry, Xavier. He covered her hand with his own. It was a long time ago, but I don't hide from it or from where I came from. The past shapes us, but it doesn't have to define us. In that moment, standing in the dusty street with the bustle of Ely continuing around them, Beatrice felt something shift between them. A deepening of understanding, a recognition of shared values despite their different paths. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Beatrice worked alongside Mrs. Jenkins during the week, her capable management helping the laundry business thrive. Word spread about her competence, and soon several of Ely's prominent households were requesting her specifically to handle their fine linens and delicate garments. Xavier stopped by regularly, sometimes with the excuse of dropping off or picking up laundry, other times openly admitting he simply wanted to see her. They often took walks in the evenings, talking about books they had read, experiences they had shared, dreams they still harbored. On Sundays, Beatrice joined Xavier at the Y Cross Ranch. True to his word, he sought her advice on curtains for his parlor, as well as other touches that would make the house more of a home. She taught him to bake apple pie, laughing at the flour that somehow found its way into his dark hair. He showed her how to ride astride rather than side saddle, supporting her as she overcame her initial fear of the powerful animals. It was during one such Sunday, nearly a month after her arrival in Ely, that Xavier finally spoke of what had been growing between them. They were sitting on his porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. A comfortable silence had fallen between them, the kind that exists only between people who are truly at ease in each other's company. "Beatrice," Xavier said finally, his deep voice quiet in the evening stillness, "I need to ask you something." She turned to look at him, noting the seriousness in his expression. "Yes. When you came to Ely, you were looking for a husband, a home, a place to belong." He hesitated, then continued. "I'm wondering if you found that place, or if you're still looking." Beatrice's heart quickened. "Are you asking if I plan to stay in Ely? I'm asking if you might consider making your home here, with me." Xavier reached for her hand, his rough palm warm against her skin. "I know it's soon. I know you came here expecting something different, but these past weeks have been the happiest I've known in a long time." "Xavier," she began, her voice unsteady, "I'm 35 years old. I'm not the young bride most men want. I'm not most men," he interrupted gently. "And I don't want most brides. I want a partner, someone with wisdom and experience, someone who understands what it means to build something that lasts." He shifted to face her more directly. "I told you once that age means wisdom to me. I meant it. You've lived enough to know your own mind, to know what matters. That's precious, Beatrice. More precious than youth or beauty, though you have beauty in abundance as well." Tears pricked at Beatrice's eyes. After a lifetime of being made to feel that her advancing years diminished her value, Xavier's words were a balm to her soul. "Are you asking me to marry you?" she whispered. "I am. Not today, not tomorrow, whenever you're ready, but I want you to know that's where my heart is heading." He squeezed her hand. "I'm falling in love with you, Beatrice Taylor, and I hope you might be feeling something similar for me." Beatrice couldn't hold back her tears now. They spilled over, tracking down her cheeks in the fading light. "I never expected this," she admitted. "When Franklin rejected me, I thought perhaps that was it, my last chance gone. And now—" "And now," Xavier prompted gently, "and now I find myself caring for a man who sees value in the very things others consider drawbacks." She wiped at her tears with her free hand. "Yes, Xavier. I'm falling in love with you too." His smile was like the breaking of dawn. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, Xavier leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, respectful, but with an undercurrent of passion that promised deeper connections to come. When they parted, Beatrice felt as if something fundamental had shifted in her world. The rejection that had brought her to this moment now seemed not a cruel blow of fate, but a necessary redirect, a closing door that had allowed her to find an open one. "I won't rush you," Xavier promised. "We can take all the time you need." "Thank you," she replied, her voice steadier now, "but I don't think I need much time at all. My heart knows what it wants." Their courtship continued through the autumn weeks, growing deeper and richer with each passing day. In town, people began to take their relationship for granted, nodding to them together, including them both in invitations, referring to them as a pair. Even Mrs. Jenkins, who had predicted this outcome from the beginning, had the grace not to say, "I told you so," too often. Franklin Wilcox, meanwhile, had departed for San Francisco, ostensibly on business but, according to gossip, actually to court a wealthy widow there. His mother remained in Ely, maintaining the family's increasingly threadbare dignity. When she passed Beatrice on the street now, she offered a small nod of acknowledgement, not quite friendly, but not hostile either. By December, with snow blanketing the high desert and Christmas approaching, Beatrice and Xavier had settled on a January wedding. The date was chosen partly for practical reasons. It would allow time for Beatrice to properly train a replacement for Mrs. Jenkins's laundry business, and partly because both felt a new year was the perfect time to begin their new life together. "Are you nervous, Mrs. Jenkins asked as she helped Beatrice pack her belongings the night before the wedding. "A little," Beatrice admitted. "Not about marrying Xavier, I'm certain about that, but about being a rancher's wife. It's so different from anything I've done before." The older woman patted her hand. "You'll learn, and you'll bring your own gifts to it. That man is getting far more than he bargained for in you, and he knows it." The wedding itself was simple but joyful, held in the small church in Ely with most of the town in attendance. Beatrice wore a new dress of deep green wool, trimmed with satin ribbons. Xavier looked handsome and slightly overwhelmed in a new suit, his dark hair tamed for the occasion. As they spoke their vows, Beatrice caught sight of Mrs. Wilcox seated at the back of the church. Their eyes met briefly, and the older woman inclined her head in what might have been respect or simply acknowledgement. Either way, Beatrice felt a final weight lift from her shoulders. The humiliation of her arrival in Ely was now completely overshadowed by the joy of this moment. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Xavier's kiss was tender yet possessive, a promise of the life they would build together. The reception was held at the town hall, with food contributed by many of Ely's residents. There was dancing and laughter, congratulations and good wishes. As evening fell, Xavier led Beatrice to the wagon that would take them home to the Y Cross Ranch that was now her home as well. The winter night was clear and cold, stars blazing in a black sky as they drove through the quiet landscape. Xavier had one arm around Beatrice, keeping her close against the chill. "Happy?" he asked, his breath forming clouds in the frosty air. "Completely," she assured him, leaning into his warmth. "Though I still can't quite believe it. 3 months ago I was standing alone at the train station, thinking my life was over before it had properly begun." Xavier chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest against her ear. "And now? Now I know it was just beginning." She tilted her face up to his. "Thank you for seeing value in me when others didn't." "Beatrice," he said seriously, "you should never doubt your worth. The wisdom you've gained through your years is a treasure. I thank God every day that Franklin Wilcox was too blind to see it." As they crested the last hill, and the lights of the ranch house came into view, Beatrice felt a surge of contentment so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. This was home now. This was where she belonged. And when Xavier carried her across the threshold of their house, into the warmth and promise of their future together, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that the mail-order bride who had been sent back for being too old had found exactly where and with whom she was meant to be all along. 5 years later, Beatrice stood on the porch of the Y Cross Ranch, watching as Xavier taught their 3-year-old son to feed a bottle to an orphaned lamb. Young Thomas, named for Xavier's father, was intent on his task, his small face furrowed in concentration as he held the bottle steady. At 40, Beatrice had long since stopped counting the lines at the corners of her eyes, or the silver threads that now liberally streaked her auburn hair. Those marks of time were badges of honor in this house, reminders of wisdom earned through experience. The ranch had prospered under their joint stewardship. Xavier's practical knowledge of cattle and the land, combined with Beatrice's organizational skills and financial acumen, had turned the Y Cross into one of the most successful operations in the region. They had expanded their holdings, improved their breeding stock, and even started a small school on the property for the children of their workers and neighboring ranches. Inside the house, in a cradle near the warmth of the kitchen stove, 2-month-old Sarah slept peacefully. She had arrived in the depths of winter, a surprise blessing that Beatrice had scarcely dared hope for at her age. The midwife had declared her the healthiest baby she'd seen in years, with a lusty cry that suggested she would be every bit as determined as her mother. Life wasn't without its challenges, of course. The high desert was an unforgiving environment, with drought and blizzards, predators and disease all constant threats to their livelihood. But they faced each obstacle together, stronger for their partnership. Franklin Wilcox had never returned to Ely. Word had reached them the previous year that he had indeed married his wealthy San Francisco widow, only to lose her fortune through bad investments within 18 months. The last anyone had heard, he was working as a clerk in a shipping office, a far cry from the privileged existence he had once known. His mother had died 2 winters ago. To Beatrice's surprise, Mrs. Wilcox had left her a small bequest, a set of fine bone china that had been in the Wilcox family for generations. The accompanying note had read simply, "To the woman who proved me wrong about what makes a good wife, use these well in the home you have made." Beatrice had been touched by the gesture. The china now graced their table on special occasions, a reminder that first impressions and prejudices could be overcome. Xavier completed the lamb feeding and sent Thomas running back to the house with the empty bottle. The boy charged up the porch steps, his cheeks red with cold and excitement. "Mama, the lamb drank it all. Papa says I did it perfect." Beatrice caught him in her arms, warming his cold hands between her own. "Well done, my love. You're becoming quite the rancher." Xavier followed more slowly, his smile warm as he watched his wife and son. At 43, he was in his prime, his body strong from years of physical work, his face weathered by sun and wind but handsome in its maturity. "He's a natural," Xavier said proudly as he joined them on the porch. "Takes after his mother good with the small, delicate things." Beatrice laughed. "I seem to recall it was you who nursed that runt piglet last spring while I was too ungainly with pregnancy to manage it." "Details, details," Xavier teased, leaning in to kiss her lightly. Thomas squirmed between them. "Is Sarah awake? Can I show her my stone collection?" "She's sleeping," Beatrice told him gently. "But perhaps after supper, if she's awake, you can show her 1 or 2 of your special stones. Quietly, mind you." Satisfied with this compromise, Thomas hurried inside to warm himself by the fire, leaving his parents alone on the porch. Xavier wrapped his arm around Beatrice's waist, drawing her against his side as they gazed out over their land. The winter sun was setting early, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. "You ever think about it?" he asked after a comfortable silence. "What might have happened if Franklin Wilcox hadn't sent you back that day?" Beatrice considered the question. "Sometimes. I might have been trapped in a loveless marriage, always made to feel inadequate because of my age. Or I might have been discarded anyway once he realized the Wilcox fortunes were failing and my small savings wouldn't save them." She turned in his arms to face him. "But mostly, I think about how fortunate I am that things happened exactly as they did. That you were there that day, with your kindness and your conviction that age means wisdom." Xavier brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch tender. "I meant every word of that, and these 5 years have only proven me right. You've brought wisdom and joy to this ranch, to my life in ways I never imagined possible." "As have you to mine," Beatrice replied softly. "When I think of how close I came to missing this, to missing you and Thomas and Sarah and all we've built together." "But you didn't miss it," Xavier reminded her, kissing her forehead. "You were exactly where you needed to be when you needed to be there. We both were." Inside the house, Sarah's cry announced her awakening. Beatrice smiled at the sound. "Duty calls." "Go on," Xavier said. "I'll finish the evening chores and be in shortly." As Beatrice turned to go inside, Xavier caught her hand, pulling her back for one more kiss. "I love you, Beatrice Young. Every line, every silver hair, every moment of wisdom you've earned." "And I love you," she replied, her heart full, "for seeing the value in all of it." as she went to tend their daughter, with Thomas chattering excitedly about which stones would be suitable for a baby to see, Beatrice reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The humiliation of being rejected, the uncertainty of finding herself alone in a strange town, the slow blossoming of unexpected love, all of it had led to this moment, this family, this life. She had come to Ely seeking a husband and found so much more. A true partner, a home filled with love, and the profound understanding that what some might see as a liability, her age and experience, was in fact her greatest strength. Outside, as Xavier moved about the ranch completing his evening tasks, he too reflected on the twist of fate that had brought Beatrice into his life. He had lived contentedly enough in his solitude, convinced that love had passed him by after Sarah's death. But Beatrice had awakened something in him, a capacity for joy, for partnership, for building a future that was richer than anything he could have created alone. As dusk settled over the Y-Cross Ranch, the lights from the house windows spilled golden across the snow, a beacon of warmth in the winter landscape. Inside, a family created against all odds went about their evening routine, bound together by love and respect, by shared work and shared dreams. And at the heart of it all was a woman who had once been deemed too old to be valuable, and the man who had recognized that her age was not a flaw, but a gift, a testament to the wisdom that comes only through living fully, loving deeply, and embracing every moment of the journey.